The Cuban Nazi Party would first apply for recognition as a legitimate political party on September 20th, 1938, by then-leader Manuel Montaño. The Havana provincial government would deny the request because it advocated for racial discrimination. A month later, Juan Prohías, owner of the newspaper El Líder, would take control of the party and give a statement saying they adopted the Nazi name, quote, because Nazism signifies the opposite extreme of communism, which we plan to fight mercilessly. On October 18, 1938, the Havana provincial government would approve the application. A government spokesperson would comment saying they had approved the Communist Party of Cuba, which was outlawed, so the Nazi Party would also have to be approved. The party was headquartered on 10th Street in the Vedado neighborhood in Havana. They would hold rallies, marches, speeches, and distribute propaganda. It is alleged that the Germans would send propaganda and funding to be distributed in Cuba. Party president Juan Prohías had many connections in the media. He was chief information officer of La Correspondencia, the second oldest newspaper in Cuba. He also worked as chief information officer for Heraldo de Cuba, and he had a radio show. On May 15, 1939, the SS St. Louis would leave Hamburg, Germany loaded with 930 Jewish refugees. The ship had no destination. The American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, or JDC, was negotiating with Holland, Belgium, and France, offering $500,000 to whoever would allow the refugees into their countries. They couldn't work out a deal with the European countries, but a Cuban travel agency based in Berlin, headed by Senator and Army Colonel Manuel Benitez, whose son had close ties with General Batista, would secure entry permits for the Jews on board into Cuba. The SS St. Louis would begin its trip to Cuba. It would take around 6 days to reach the port of Havana. But the Cuban Nazi Party. Many sources cite the bulk of this protest was orchestrated by the Cuban Nazi Party, but there is other groups such as the Cuban Fascist Party and the Cuban Phalangists that likely played some role, had gotten word of the ship's arrival and began printing papers and doing radio shows against allowing the Jewish refugees into Cuba. When the ship arrived, the party had managed to bring 40,000 people to protest the refugees, and their protest would ultimately be successful. Only 28 passengers would be allowed off the ship into Cuba. 22 of them were Jewish, 4 were Spaniards, and 2 were Cubans. The United States would apply pressure to the Cuban government to allow the refugees into the country. But the president declared that Cuba would have no further dealings with the committee and the ship had to leave Cuban waters. They allowed time for the ship's crew to rest and replenish before departing again. On June 2nd, Cuban military ships would escort the ship into international waters. This is one of the most notable acts of the Cuban Nazi Party in their short history. The Cuban Nazi Party would be dissolved on September 27, 1940, with a statement from Prohías saying, "Our association, exclusively, was an organization against the Jews, against the racket of Jewish immigration. Jewish immigration ended. In August, the war was clear. The Russian-German pact came, and it was agreed to dissolve the party." Despite Prohías' statement about willingly dissolving the party, the end was already near. They tried to rename their party the Fifth Column Party to avoid dissolution, but the government banned the party anyway. Batista would begin supporting the Allied war effort in February of 1941. He would kick all the German and Italian officials out of Cuba, and after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Cuba declared war on Germany and Italy.